Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's DataTel webinar on Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace Cloud Backup discussion. I am joined here by Ben Tigler. Ben, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, Ben Tiglar, CEO of DataTel.
Awesome. And I'm the CISO here at DataTel. We are going to be talking about backups, but unique backups. Most of the time when people talk about or think about cloud, they think about Microsoft 365 or somewhere that they've, got a service and they've uploaded information and data and they think, oh, great, I'm done. I don't have to do anything, because that's kind of the way that these providers sell themselves. But unfortunately, that's not the truth. So to understand how this works, first of all, a slight legal disclaimer. Some of the things I'm going to be discussing and showing today are things that most of these companies would like to be kept somewhat under the radar. But I'm not under any NDAs, and all of this information I'm presenting has been found in public sources. So you're going to get to see some behind the scenes secret stuff today.
I want to hear the dirt.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Let's start with a bit of a history lesson. I'm going to sound like a really old man here because I am. Back in my day, before normal speed internet and such, we had to have a physical server on site in order to host information and data. We even had email servers on site. We had everything. Everything lived for a company at their physical location on a physical server. And it was easy to say, my data lives there, because it's a physical box that you could walk up to and see and touch and feel. We had typical issues with that, right? People wanted to ensure that they had proper uptime, that if hardware went down or there was a power outage or whatever, we started to add all of these redundancies in place. It went from one server to two servers, to server clusters, to redundant backups, to all of these types of things. But one thing that remained consistent regardless was that you always had backups, not just the redundancies, but the backups. And backups were typically copied to an external hard drive and physically walked off-site somewhere. So if the building burned down, you still had a copy of your data. Now, with that understanding, let's take a look at data centers. Let's take a look at the cloud and how the cloud actually functions. Let's see, share out the screen and share. Now, when we look at this, and change up my view here. Not that one. I want to go to speaker view. Nope. Oh, my screen view. That's it. Gallery and screen view. So when we take a look at this, you see these kind of nondescript buildings sitting here?
Mm-hmm.
This is Amazon AWS West Oregon. They're just buildings and they're full of servers. Now, Amazon and AWS, they call this a redundancy zone. So when you go and you say, I want my data to go into the cloud, I want it to live here, you get to choose from a list of locations. And this is one of those locations for Amazon. This is here in Oregon. It again is just buildings. They've got redundant generators, redundant backups. So the only thing that's really changed in cloud computing is that it's not a server that you own. Your data is now living on somebody else's server. And they've got massive redundancies, right? We couldn't afford to even build one of these buildings, much less four of them. And as we zoom out a bit here, you're going to notice that there's more buildings over here. That's also part of Amazon's data center. These are more Amazon data centers down here. This big empty space in the middle that's getting built, going to be more Amazon data centers. Here's some more down here, and here's some more over here. So in general, as we look at this area here in Oregon, and we zoom out a bit, this is Boardman, Oregon. The vast majority of spaces here, this is all Amazon. This is their West data center. So they've got a lot of redundancy in place here, right? But and you choose their location, this is the literal physical location your data is going to live in. And your data is going to live in one or more of these buildings to provide redundancy. That make sense?
Yep, 100%.
Boardman, you'll notice, is kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We still keep zooming out, and then finally we'll reach Portland, and there's Seattle up there. So it's quite literally in the middle of nowhere, which is excellent, right, for redundancies, because you're kind of there's not much around. There's not much that can impact things. Let's take a look at something that's a little closer to home here for us. This is about 5 minutes down the road from our office here in Hillsboro. These 4 giant buildings here, which are 2-story buildings, again, wall-to-wall servers, this is Facebook or Meta. So this is their West Coast data center. And if we head just a little bit over here to the east, in this building is where Wasabi. Wasabi is a popular cloud file storage solution. This is their West Coast data. So they've got a giant rack in this building, a whole bunch of servers in it, and that's where that data lives when you put it into a zone. So data centers really are, when you talk about the cloud, it's not some giant mystical thing. It truly is just your data is now living on somebody else's servers. I'm going to take a slight tangent here because I find this fascinating. If we head a little bit south, you see this business park right here?
Mm-hmm.
In particular, this building right down here. We jump in and we take a look at this building. It just looks like a normal office building, right? This is actually a data center. It's a very important data center because this is the data center that Netflix and Comcast on demand, any of your on-demand video that's distributed here in the local Portland area comes out of this building. So kind of interesting stuff there. When we talk about data and we talk about servers and where that data lives, we also have to bring up Microsoft's done a great job of presenting this. It's what's called shared responsibility. Just because your data lives on somebody else's server doesn't mean it's suddenly their responsibility, right? So division of responsibility, and they've laid this out in a beautiful way. These columns here start with on-premise. Back when we had the physical servers that were in our building that lived in our place, we had to take full responsibility for everything, right? Power, data, internet, backups, all of it. It was all our responsibility. When you move to infrastructure as a service, Microsoft starts taking on some of those areas of responsibility. Platform as a service, some of them are shared now, and then software as a service. This is where Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, Confluence, whatever application you're using out there that's cloud, that's what this falls under, is software as a service. Notice that Microsoft has taken on the majority of the responsibility, but there is still 3 areas that are very solidly your responsibility. And the big one right there at the top is information and data. So we often get questions around Microsoft, around the different features that they have built in. They do have disaster recovery copies of your data, but it is designed specifically for a situation in which the primary data center is unable to continue to operate. So this is not a backup you have access to. This is a backup for Microsoft to have access to when they have a significant major failure.
Interesting distinction there. So it's only for them from, like, if there was a
earthquake, a flood,
an earthquake, natural disaster, right?
Exactly. Yep. And even in those scenarios, those disaster recovery copies will take them days, if not weeks, to recover, right? You're going to be down waiting for them to restore it in that scenario. Versions. We often hear, well, Microsoft's keeping every version of every document. Why can't I just roll back to an earlier version of something? Versions are great for individual users to restore files to a prior point in time, but it does not work for large scale recovery. So if you've got a ransomware attack, and yes, ransomware in the cloud is a thing, large scale ransomware attacks, or somebody goes through maliciously and deletes a bunch of data out of your tenant, versions are not going to solve that. And you can't solve it in an easy way, because if you've got thousands of documents, you can't open each one up and go back to a previous version and save and open the next one, right? That's not a reasonable thing.
Can you talk a little bit more about the ransomware in the cloud? I think that there's a misunderstanding there from a lot of clients that we talk to. Can you touch on that?
Absolutely. There's a fantastic video that some folks at Huntress put together that goes through how an attack like this works. Somebody sends you a link, you click on it, it asks for permission to access your OneDrive, for example, maybe under the guise of sharing documents or providing you with some important legal guidance. It then gains access to your OneDrive through an application that you've approved, and it then starts running through encrypting all of your data, just like typical ransomware would on a local server. But in this case, it's doing it on Microsoft servers.
Got it. So the idea is just because you're SaaSified doesn't mean, you don't have exposure here, right?
Exactly.
Works the same way. Yep. Okay.
It's exactly the same. The tools and techniques are a little bit different, but it actually makes things easier for the attackers once they gain access to make things happen. But the old ransomware risk still exists because that data also is living on your computer, especially if you're synced with OneDrive, right? If you have all of your files synced to your computer, ransomware gets on your computer and it encrypts those. All of those files are now encrypted in the cloud as well. Because once again, it's, your data, you own and live with your data. So versions don't solve the backup need. The next one is legal hold. You can do a thing in 365 called legal hold, where you basically put a freeze on an account. Every change that's made starts creating these versions so that you can go back in time and peel layers off and see what somebody is doing. The purpose of a legal hold is to retain the data, but it's a feature that's optimized for export. This is for gathering information that you need to hand to a lawyer for a court case, for example, thus legal hold. This is not designed for mass restore. And believe me, we've tried it. It does not work. It's a gigantic pain to have to go through it. So when we talk about backups, it is really important to understand that even with all of the redundancy that is put in place by having data centers and by having a cluster of them, it is just that. It is redundancy. It is not backups. Backing up your data is your responsibility. And this is a division of responsibility, again, really important to understand. So that's where we get to talk about our backups and what we provide for our fully managed clients. So our fully managed clients automatically get this. It is just part of the bundle, part of what we do, because we understand that data backup is critical. Doesn't matter if it's in the cloud or on site. Owning that data and being able to gain access to it if something were to go sideways or to recover it in an emergency is really important. So we have a SaaS backup solution that we use, and this is looking at our own internal setup, where we are able to back up all kinds of things. We're grabbing everything out of Microsoft 365. Users, shared mailboxes, rooms, SharePoint, Teams, Entra ID, which we'll look at in a minute, and even the Power Platform. So as you build out things in PowerApps, we're able to capture that information and make sure that we can roll it back when there's an issue. Within our platform, we can look up a particular user and go to recover, and it's very simple. It shows us our inbox, just like we would have in Outlook. You get a contacts list of all your contacts. You get a calendar. It's even in a calendar view. You can recover tasks and even Microsoft chats. So if you're in Microsoft Teams doing a person-to-person chat, those are backed up and accessible here within our recovery console. We can go to different versions. So want to go back here to 12:46 p.m.? We can do that. We can go back and recover different versions as well.
What's the frequency of the snapshots for which you can go back, and how far does it go back?
So it's three times a day is when we're backing them up. It's the exact time is going to be a little bit different depending on when it was set up and what the Microsoft APIs are allowing us to do. We're restricted a bit by their limits that Microsoft puts on their APIs. But it's 3 snapshots a day, and we can hold these as far back as you're willing to, pay for the storage to hold them. Our minimum is 90 days, but in this case, you can see we're rolling back for a year.
Got it.
This is actually back to the Genuine acquisition is when we first started doing this here.
Okay, nice.
But we can retain it unlimited amount of time. There's just a cost for additional data storage. With the items, when you want to access them, there is the ability to select what your items are, and then we can recover them. So we can restore them directly back to where they were before, or we can even recover the entire account. And again, the actual restore time is going to be dependent on how much data the user has, how much Microsoft's restricting APIs. All of our test recoveries and the live recoveries that we've done have not taken very long, couple of hours at most.
Can you run me through a situation in which this would be helpful, like on an individual user basis, and then obviously the typical ransomware attack for a whole org?
Yeah, so let's say that a user went in and accidentally deleted a folder in their Outlook that had really important data on it, and they can't find it anywhere. So our options are to either start digging through Microsoft's e-discovery or to start digging through their file versioning, which for each of those, you have to submit a particular request for specific dates and times and the data that you're looking for, and then wait several hours for that to come back. And then you can start going through the process of exporting the data. And once you've exported it, which again takes hours, you can then take it and drop it back into their Outlook. It's a nightmare to deal with. And we're talking hours and hours and hours to make it happen. So, hey, I accidentally deleted these 3 emails out of my inbox and I need them back again. And they've been permanently deleted, right? They went deleted items and then they left deleted items and they're gone. Or maybe it was from 6 months ago and I just don't know where they are. We can search for and hunt for and find the things that they need and then recover it back into their inbox. In the event of a cloud ransomware event, again, we could just recover the full account and restore everything that user had. There's a global search option as well where we can do this across multiple accounts. It could be useful in a case where, let's say you had an employee that was working for you a year ago. They were no longer with the company a year ago. Their account in Microsoft was deleted, but now suddenly you've got a contract issue that you need to pull emails from their mailbox in order to prove a contract of some sort. That's another common case that we see. So the user's been deleted out of 365. It's long gone. It's way past Microsoft's retention period. We can still access it here because we retain a backup of their mailbox indefinitely, even after they're gone.
Nice.
And that gives us the ability to get to recover. We can even recover to a different mailbox if we needed to, or we can download these and export them, which is super helpful for any sort of legal stuff that you're trying to address. When we talk about protection as well, and Entra ID, this is the only solution that I am aware of that backs up the entire Entra ID or Azure Active Directory environment. And when I say entire, I mean it's grabbing everything, all of your users, all of your groups, all of your security roles, your security setups, even down to the application level. So in Microsoft, you register different applications with Microsoft and you create what permissions those applications have and how they access stuff. So if somebody goes in and makes a mistake or adjusts permissions or changes something in an application, we can actually go back and restore it to its previous point in time. This is a very unique feature of our backup solution. And we also keep all of the Entra ID and Azure, Intune device things as well. So you can see if you had a computer that you got rid of a long time ago, it's no longer there. You can't find the BitLocker recovery key for it. We actually are retaining all of that data as part of our backups.
And that's huge because this is really it's the brains and the setup within most mature Microsoft driven orgs, right? Like the if you lose it or you have, this is the highway for which all information flows, basically. Or is there a better way to think about it?
No, I mean, if your data, your information is in Microsoft's cloud, they're providing incredible redundancy, right? And Microsoft goes even further than Amazon does in that different mailboxes live in different regions around the country. So your mailbox is going to live closer to Texas because that's where you are, whereas mine's going to live closer to me here in Oregon. Um, and then it's copied multiple times in their data center. So redundancy, as far as making sure that your data is accessible, is very high when we're talking about these SaaS and cloud providers. But when something happens to that data, the cloud provider can't help you get it back. When it's gone, it's gone. If they screw up an encryption key and they can't get back into their system, then that data is not recoverable. And then that's happened in a number of cases. If, again, you have a malicious actor that locks you out of your Microsoft tenant, or somebody gets in there, or somebody who's even an insider threat starts deleting stuff, it's gone. Microsoft cannot help you get that back. And that's why a third-party proper backup solution for your data is so critically important. So that's what I had to show everybody today, because it's just really important to understand the difference between redundancies and backups.
Cool. We've got one question. We've got a couple of questions here. Difference between private storage and hybrid storage. How are they different? What is the, how do you think about it? Are there benefits or risks to each?
Private or hybrid cloud storage. So private cloud storage would be, I mean, it depends on what vendors you're talking about. In most scenarios, a private would be like an on-premise server that you have, and then a hybrid is you have a copy of that server that also exists in the cloud. So you're running a hybrid on-prem and remote. That's typically what that means for cloud storage. Again, all that's doing is providing redundancy. It's not providing backup, unless that cloud provider is also specifically taking point in time snapshots and providing it as a mutable backup.
Got a compliance question here. How do cloud backup solutions help with compliance framework? So think like HIPAA, SOC 2, et cetera. Like are there requirements for basically all frameworks? Are they recommendations? What's kind of the high level view? I know we can't get into every single specific one, but
yeah, it's a little different for all of them, but every single framework I'm aware of out there has a recovery clause. There's some requirement in there to be able to have a disaster recovery plan for when risks or things occur. So backups are critically important as a part of that data recovery plan. Because again, the data is your responsibility. It's not the cloud provider's responsibility. They cover, that looking at that shared responsibility list, they cover a lot. They don't cover everything. And that's where under compliance, you are required to provide evidence of your backups and evidence that you have a proper disaster recovery solution in place.
cool. I think that's all we've got. Anything else to share, Ernest?
There's one other one here that says if you shared, is what you shared true, and the same with all cloud storage providers and players. And yes, it's everything. It doesn't matter, even your personal Gmail account. If you go read the terms of service, they're not responsible for your data. It is your data and your responsibility. So that shared division of responsibility is true. The only place that it would be different is when we're talking about utilizing an MSP or a managed service provider like us. In a scenario where you've got a contract with us and we're including both the 365 and the backups of the data, there's a difference in that shared responsibility matrix where we are handling those backups and thus responsible for a lot of that information and data and recovery.
So this backup discussion is mostly around like Microsoft and Microsoft related environments. What about, that's just one piece or one part of the scope. What is the other parts of the scope that maybe we should be aware of? Think like servers, other parts of your network. Like what are the things that we haven't talked about today that we might need to talk about later?
Well, redundancy and backup those are core concepts to every component of your business. Not just cloud, not just data, but what happens if you can't get into your office? There's a giant ice storm How are you going to continue to operate, right? What are your redundancy options there? What are your even if you've got a construction company, if your equipment fails, what is your redundancy option? Are you going to go rent something? Do you have an agreement already set up with the rental company to go get that replacement piece of equipment? Right. So redundancies and backups are just a critical part of every business, and you have to think through it in every aspect of your business. If you have on-premise servers, absolutely. What is your redundancy there? Well, do you have multiple servers? What's your backup? How is that data getting somewhere safe so that it's capable of being restored when something happens to that server?
Makes sense.
We had a great question here about the onboarding and setup process. The setup process for our SaaS backup solution takes the actual person involved portion of that setup takes about 5 minutes. Getting the first backup in place takes about 30 minutes. Of course, it depends on the size of your organization, but that's pretty typical. You're muted, by the way, Ben. The next question was for businesses still using on-premise backups, how extensive is the onboarding and transition process to a cloud method? So that's a great question, Doug. If you have an on-premise server, then you're going to want to, it depends on what your goals are. If your goal is just to keep that on-premise server and to back it up offsite, we got a lot of options, and it really depends on how quickly you need that data back up and functioning, or that system back up and functioning, and then how much data you're willing to lose. As you saw in our demonstration here, we're backing up data 3 times a day on the 365 side. So if you had that backup at noon, and then at 3 o'clock before the next backup runs, you have an issue, you're going to lose 3 hours of data. So what is your, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked around what's called RTO and RPO, recovery time objective and recovery point objective, to determine the best solution for on-premise. If you're looking to fully transition to moving all of your data off of on-premise and to the cloud, that is going to have a whole lot of factors involved. How fast is your internet? How much data is involved? Are we talking a bunch of large files or a bunch of small files? I'm sorry, a few large files or a lot of small files. All of that makes a big difference in that onboarding and transition process.
I got another question. You've got, say you've got servers that you're hosting in an AWS data center. What are the typical backup solutions for that? Like if you don't currently have backups, are there third parties? Are there solutions within AWS? Run me through kind of what a typical setup might look like.
Absolutely. So when you're talking about traditional server loads that you're running in Azure or in AWS, again, that data is your responsibility. And there's a whole history of Microsoft and Amazon destroying virtual machines. When that happens, you have to have some sort of backup, and how you do that is up to you. There's third-party options. There's options that they provide where they can keep copies of that data in multiple data centers. It's called geographic redundancy. We just helped a client set up geographic redundant storage for their cloud file storage solution that they're working on. There's a lot of different options and that are available to you. You really need to consult with an expert to figure out what your risk level is. Because one of the risks that I think everybody forgets about is, what if you lose access to the account? If you're using Amazon and you're using Amazon to back up your stuff, and Amazon makes a billing mistake and thinks that your account is past due and locks out your account, you don't have access to your data anymore. Right? That's a very real risk and a very big thing that happens. And no matter what size of organization you have, you're a tiny little part to Amazon, and getting a response from them is not going to be quick and easy. So I always personally recommend third-party backups. Backup is what they call 3-2-1, where you want 3 copies of your data living in 2 different places, and one of them should be immutable or offline. So that's just kind of your general backup philosophy there.
Another question here. What ways can I justify the investment to leadership internally for having third-party backup system? So it's expensive. People, they don't currently have it. There might be pushback from a financial perspective. What's the pitch to leadership saying, we probably need to do this, or this might happen?
Showing that division of shared responsibility and showing the legal documents from Microsoft is the first case, right? Look, they are providing redundancy. They are not providing backups. So when something happens to our data, they don't guarantee they can help us get it back. So how important is that data? How important is your business? If it goes down, and let's say that there is a chance Microsoft can restore something for you. You have a major issue, a big security flaw, somebody gets in and ransomwares everything. You go to Microsoft, it's going to take them 12 hours for the initial response. And then from there, they've got to go through all of this verifying who you are and all of this other information. You're looking at being down for weeks before they could even start the recovery process. And then that recovery process is going to be beyond messy. So, how important is your business? What happens when that business goes down? What happens when you need to prove a contract from an employee that's no longer with the company that their data is gone because you've removed the user, right? Those are all risk factors that you have to take to leadership and say, what's your acceptable risk, and get it in writing that, yes, we're willing to accept that risk for something that's a few dollars a month per user. The cost is not significant on providing third-party backups.
Love it. This is awesome. Thank you, Ernest.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your week.